respect to same gender or same-sex sexual harassment, we talked a little bit about this briefly in the chapter on sexual harassment, but it is important to know that an individual can bring a claim of sexual harassment by someone of the same gender. And it doesn't have to be necessarily about sexual orientation. That men can harass men, women can harass women, and it particularly comes around gender norms and gender stereotypes, that if a male may be a little bit more effeminate than his friends, that he doesn't want to engage in locker room humor, quote unquote, and if he complains, then he may get harassed because of and treated differently because of his sex or because of his gender. And the same thing for females as well. You know, if someone is too masculine or too feminine, we might see the same sort of situation. Although the case that comes to mind is the Uncali versus Sundowner, and that was about the men harassing another man. But there are other cases. There was one with casino in Las Vegas where it was the same scenario where the person was being harassed because he did not fit the gender norms or the gender standards there. Treating employees differently based on gender is prohibited by Title VII, and it's the same sort of thing. Whether it's sexual orientation or anything else, we don't treat them differently because of that. So Nichols versus Aztec Restaurants is another example of that. In terms of gender identity discrimination, the Human Rights Campaign defines what it means to be transgender. And what it means is that it encompasses people who cross-dress, that people who might identify as a straight male, but they just like to wear women's clothing. Intersex people who have what we call ambiguous genitalia, and that means that they may have genitalia that are expressed as male or female or neither or both. There are challenges around when babies are born with ambiguous genitalia that oftentimes parents feel like they need to identify, and they order surgery right away on children, and now we're seeing that, right, even for people who are intersex, that we allow the adults or children are no longer, decisions aren't being made for children. The trend is moving towards let the children decide as they come to figure out their own identity and how they want to express themselves, whether they feel like they are male or female, and then they can choose to identify as they want to. Someone who transsexuals, meaning someone who basically was born with one identity. They were assigned a gender identity at birth, and then they choose to, they recognize that that doesn't align with their self-view. And so they they will make the decision to identify as their true self, crossing the gender divide into hence transgender. And there are people that even beyond being born with ambiguous genitalia, we have people, for example, that may have androgen sensitivities and such that their body does not process androgen. So therefore, even if they are genotypically masculine or male, they have XY chromosomes, they present as female with XX, as if they were XX, even though they're not, because the body does not manage androgen properly. And so there's all sorts of different variations. If you were actually to look at the research on transgender identities and intersex identities, you'll start to see a wide variety of conditions where people do not fall within a certain clear parameters on whether or not they identify as male or female. The American Medical Group American Medical Association rather, calls this gender dysphoria. It is considered a medical condition, and we do know that when fetuses are feminized in the womb, and there's all sorts of reasons why a fetus might be feminized or masculinized in the womb, that's where we start to have the dysphoria, if you will, between what my body says I am and what my brain says that I am. sexual orientation, people are not at odds with their assigned gender. As an out lesbian, I'm comfortable with my identity as a woman, but I also happen to be a woman who loves a woman. Um, versus someone who has gender dysphoria, their identity, even though if I had issues around gender dysphoria, I would be in a female body, but I would identify as male. In 2016, the New York Times estimated there's 1.4 million transgender Americans, and we see again their visibility is growing in leaps and bounds. Surgery is not the issue. A lot of people say, well, if they get the surgery, then of course, then that makes sense. And not all transgender individuals choose to get the surgery. It's dangerous and it's major surgery. I mean, you're making life-altering changes to your body, whether you're trying to have a phallus that will actually be functional if you're a transgender male, or if you have to create a vagina for a transgender female. Or hormone treatments for that matter. Surgery or hormones are secondary. Someone chooses to identify as masculine or feminine, or as male or female, as part of being transgender. There's no obligation that they have to have the surgery or hormone treatments in order for that to occur, and that's protected under the gender dysphoria and the medical protections, etc. And they're private issues. They're nobody's business. What kind of genitalia I have underneath my dress or my pants or what have you. People go into the bathroom. No one looks at each other's genitalia when they're in the bathroom, and even men don't have to go sit at the trough, right? When they go to the bathroom, they can go into a stall and they can go to the bathroom that way. Not everybody has to go to a particular pit or a urinal in order to be able to go to the bathroom. So it is important that we recognize that someone's decision to have surgery or hormone treatments is not relevant, that it's really about privacy and the privacy and the protection and the safety for people who are transgender. ENDA really almost blew it. A large number of years ago, ENDA was not going to cover transgender issues, and that created a major rift between the transgender community and the Human Rights Campaign. They have since remedied that and are working very hard to make sure that our transgender sisters and brothers and siblings, for those who are non-binary, are protected appropriately under the laws. Initially, gender identity was not protected under Title VII, even if they had gender reassignment surgery. And in fact, there was a pilot, Elaine, who was flying for Eastern Airlines, and they wanted to be reinstated as a female pilot because they had transitioned from male to female, and he was told that, or she was told that they had to dress as a male because that's who they were when they were hired, and that they would be fired if they didn't conform to the uniform expected for a female pilot, or for a male pilot versus a female pilot. At the time, Elaine was denied reinstatement. Today, Elaine would not lose their job, but at the time they did. An example of issues that can arise and how employees' responses can protect against liability for discrimination was the Boeing case in that circumstance there. That was listed in your textbook. Benefits are a huge issue, particularly for the LGBTQ community. The benefits represent about 30% of our total compensation. And there are hurdles for the LGBT community to be able to take that leave. For example, if you're in a same-sex marriage and you have that hidden, what if something happens to your partner or your partner's family and you need to take leave for grieving, for when someone has passed away? Can you take leave? Well, if nobody knows you're in a same-sex relationship, nobody knows that your family member has passed, and you cannot be public about that, you don't get to take leave. If you do, then you take leave without pay, And that creates all sorts of complications for people. What about healthcare coverage, right? If nobody knows you're in a same-sex relationship, you're married legally, your spouse cannot get healthcare coverage from you. What if you have children, shared children, and there's no, you're a man and you have an adopted child and there's no wife involved? Well, what if there's an issue, right, around being able to take paternity leave or things of that nature? So there's so many complications. Same-sex marriage has definitely eased some of those burdens, and of course, Bostock now eases more of those burdens. But that still doesn't mean that people aren't living in the closet and are still afraid, deeply afraid, to reveal their identity, making it really challenging for people to be productive employees because they're constantly hiding, constantly checking their pronouns, constantly checking the language and the stories that they tell to protect themselves, and it's exhausting mentally. Pre-Bostock, we really were concerned about those LGBT employees who did not have state and local civil rights protections. And it's still a concern, don't get me wrong. But I think that it's less of a concern now because the Bostock ruling has passed. But I think, again, we're still not clear how that will be implemented, how it will be laid out. And so that's obviously something we'll be following in the next couple of years to see. Leave and insurance coverage for gender assignment surgery. We're seeing more and more employers are requiring this, and there's a lot of pressure from groups like the Human Rights Campaign that push organizations to get a higher rating to make sure that they are protecting their transgender employees, that they're allowing bathroom rights for those individuals. Oftentimes, people are not being allowed to go to the bathroom of their gender, in which case then it creates all sorts of hygiene issues for individuals who may not be able to go to the bathroom during the day. And if you don't go to the bathroom during the day, that creates health issues for you. So if people are then avoiding the bathrooms, we start to have problems. So more and more insurance coverage and policies are protecting our transgender employees to ensure that they have access to gender reassignment surgery if needed. We have a few management considerations and some management tips that follow. Number one, LGBTQ HR issues remain a front burner as they work their ways through the society. Um, they should be treated similar in kind to other familiar claims, right? So any HR related issues regarding LGBT employees should be treated similarly. The bottom line is people should not be treated differently um, because of who they love, period. Work your systems for management and prevention, right? Because of the perceived newsworthiness, restrictive policies may have some business ramifications beyond HR. For example, companies like Cracker Barrel and Chick-fil-A that actively discriminate against LGBT employees, or as in Cracker Barrel, but also like Chick-fil-A, where their money from the privately owned corporation goes right to anti-LGBT organizations. And so, people who go eat at Chick-fil-A or do business with Chick-fil-A, they are actively participating in a form of discrimination against LGBT individuals indirectly. Because if you're giving money and then the profits you're giving money to buy the product or service, the profit that comes from that goes directly to organizations that discriminate. Um, that can result in boycotting for those organizations, and so it is a bad for business situation in that most people do boycott. Most people I know who are LGBT boycott Chick-fil-A, and they call it "quote unquote" hate chicken. I know I do, but we don't go to those organizations because they are known to discriminate. So why would we give them our money so that we would be complicit in our own demise, right? We need sensitivity in handling issues where religious beliefs and DEI interferes. It is important to make sure that we are respecting religious beliefs, but at the same time recognizing that business policies um, require people to work together to work together towards accomplishing the work of the company. And so DEI issues become a big issue when it conflicts with religious issues. And the AT&T and Bonanno case is what you shouldn't be doing as an FYI. So reviewing that case is important. So, in terms of some of the important tips, recognize that the policies and decisions around orientation and identity are really evolving and evolving quickly, particularly post Bostock. And again, this has only been about a year since it passed as I'm recording this video in summer 2021. So, it's essential that we recognize that these changes are amazingly rapid, and there's a lot of adjustments that are being made, at each organization's policies, etc. This affects our HR policies, and we want protection from liability for sexual orientation and gender identity issues, so we have to actively engage in these policies. And it may take a while. It's going to evolve. People are having to adapt over the last year to all sorts of things, including this pandemic. So being able to make these adaptations little by little is really important. So use only relevant work-related criteria when you're making hiring decisions, period, or promotion decisions, or any work-related decision. Can they do the job? Boom. No problems. Doesn't matter what people do in their private life. What religion they practice in their private life, who they love in their private life, you name it. Keep inquiries about their personal lives at a minimum. Make sure the requested information is relevant for the job. Have a policy ensuring all employees respect each other in the workplace, and ensuring that we are not only aware of the policies, but what it means if you violate it. Last 4 tips. In the workplace, be sure the respect policy protects everyone from things like unsolicited negative statements about immutable characteristics such as race, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation. Take prompt action whenever there are complaints of violations of the policy, because if you don't, then it says the policy is meaningless. So make sure you respond quickly when someone violates a policy. Decide what position to take on orientation and gender identity related issues for policy purposes, either proactively or even, after an issue arises, defensively. But the bottom line is decide what your position is and stick with it. And it is important, though, to not really wait until a bad event happens. If we can be proactive in implementing policies, of course it's going to be resisted, and of course it's going to be a challenge, but it's worth doing. Lastly, be aware of the potential impact on LGBTQ employees of workplace policies like bereavement, like benefits, like um, uh, bringing your partners to office functions like holiday parties and summer picnics, about allowing personal calls during work hour or putting personal items on walls. If you're going to allow it, then you need to allow, your same-sex individuals, who are in same-sex relationships to be able to put those up as well. So if you're going to have a policy on it, you need to make sure it's inclusive. Otherwise, all you're doing is creating an othering of people who are going to struggle with feeling like they're a part of the company and being committed to the company. And the last thing we want is people to not be committed to our company and to want to leave, because that's costly to us. And also it's just rude and inappropriate.